that's a lot of money. And he's like, it's good. It's worth it. I'm like, how could that possibly be worth it? And so I remember that moment, and it planted this thing in my mind. Where like, I can't afford that. Someday I'll be able to afford that. Internships, starter jobs. 2 I'm going to spend a minute on here is books and coaching. So I have to tell you how ironic it is that I'm up here talking about a book that I wrote. Because 5 years ago, I hadn't read a book in like 20 years. I was the guy that prided himself on doing no reading whatsoever. Like AP English, my poor AP English teacher, I mean, I was Cliff Notes, Spark Notes, book summaries. I could turn a 1-paragraph book summary into a 10-page report. I mean, that was me, and I prided myself in it. College, I'm in 2.71. Woo! It was because I didn't do any reading. My wife hated it. She's like, I read every single page 7 times and rewrote the book and studied. So 5 years ago, when I started coaching with Reed, I finally worked up the courage to pay for it. And I'm like, all right, you know what? This guy's going to ask me to read. Leaders are readers. And I remember it. I was prepared. I was probably sitting on a little thing like this, on my call with him. I might have had AirPods. And he's like, all right, Steve, so tell me about your reading plan this year. I'm like, well, Reed, I haven't been a really good reader, but you know what? I'm going to read a book a month this year. And in his gentle way, he goes, that's really good, Steve. Someone in your position leading as many people should probably be reading a book a week. I'm like, he goes, we'll settle on 2 a month. I'm like, all right, let's do it. And I didn't even know who good book writers were. I think they're called authors. And so he gave me my first 15 books to read. And I jumped in. I'm like, this is amazing. And 2 things. So I'll give you the permission here. 2 things he gave me permission to do. Number 1, Audible, audiobooks, those count. I had never even heard of that, which, by the way, you can go on Amazon and buy the audiobook. If you want to read the physical book, audiobook, you got both of them. And I never heard about that. That was awesome because I'm driving from Lubbock to Amarillo. Nice part about that is you don't even have to touch the steering wheel and get to go 90 miles an hour. And so I burned through so many books on that. The second thing he gave me permission on is you don't have to finish it. Don't have to finish the book. Authors put their best stuff up front, right? It's not going to get any better on the back end of the book. So if you're not getting anything up front, you don't have to finish it. And that helped me know all right, I'm not trapped to gut my way through this book. So those 2 things led to me reading 37 books my first year. And I think I got to 45 the second year. So I just plowed through and I could pick, and I was learning everything. And then you guys know when Brent's reading a new book, right? Because that's what your next team meeting is all about. And he's teaching you right? I was the same way. First thing you learn it, and then you teach it, or you do it, then you teach it. If you haven't subscribed, click the subscribe button below so that you know every time I upload a new video so you can be encouraged and equipped to build your best life. So books, so much capacity from that. And then the last thing is coaching. And so with coaching, I remember when I became a new partner. I'm 25 years old. I am crushing it, making $130,000 a year, thinking I'm the hottest thing in the world. And I'm sitting in my managing partner's office, and he's like, I just got off my coaching call. I'm like, what's that? He's telling me about it. I'm like, how much did that cost? He's like, I think it was $500. And I'm like a month for the year? He's like, no, for that call. I'm like, for 1 call? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, how often do you do that? He's like, every week. I'm like, every week? That's a lot of money. And he's like, it's good. It's worth it. I'm like, how could that possibly be worth it? And so I remember that moment, and it planted this thing in my mind where I can't afford that. Someday I'll be able to afford that. And for years, I'm like, I'll never be able to afford coaching. And then right as I'm moving to West Texas to become a managing partner where I'm responsible for leading leaders, not just leading producers, Reed's like, hey, I got a couple openings for clients. I'm like, all right, well, how much does it cost? And he tells me, I'm like, geez, yeah, wow, I figured. In my mindset, this is where the shift happened. It wasn't how can I afford that? It was what would need to happen on the back end for this to be a no-brainer financially. And so it took me a year. It was a year before I ended up hiring. Tabitha remembers the conversations we're having, all right, I'm planning for this. We would need this and this and this to happen. And then ultimately it's all right, Reed, what can we expect from this? And that's how coaching works. Because think about it, right? When were you learning the most in life? When were you growing the most in life, right? We were a kid. Right? I've got a 4-year-old. What's the difference between a 4-year-old and an 18-year-old? A lot, 100x, right? What's the difference between an 18-year-old and a 32-year-old? 2 or 3x, right? Like the amount of growth you go from 4 to 18. Well, what do you have the whole time? You got a soccer coach, you got a band coach, you got a swimming coach, you got teachers, you got your Sunday school teacher. I mean, you got coaches all over your life, your parents every single day. And then all of a sudden we get into real life, adulthood, and we don't have any more coaches. We got to figure it out. You ever think about that? It's kind of weird, huh? And so it took me from 18 to 30 to figure that out. And then I'm finally like, all right, I probably should hire a coach. And the amount of growth over the last 5 years of my life has been about 5x. So that is one of the biggest things you can do for your informal education, books and coaching.